Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we are seeing the biggest escalation with Latin America and the United States, well, in about like 45, 50 years. What we're seeing right now with Venezuela, as we've been reporting for quite some time, is now heating up in a totally different way. Now, Trump has declared airspace above Venezuela to be closed in its entirety. Of course, this is leading to some very threatening images of Stingray fighter jets. It's leading to Maduro telling Venezuelan Air Force to be ready amid the Trump threats. And of course, it's leading to him pushing back and saying the airspace is not closed. Well, there's a bit more of a nefarious agenda at play here, as I've been reporting for quite some time, but it's all coming to light now as we see more and more information come out about this small Venezuelan island. It's of course called the Margarita Island, and they once again, this is more evidence that this is involved directly with from the hands of Israel and the globalists worldwide. This is all about stopping Hezbollah terrorism in Latin America. Has nothing to do with so-called cartels, and those cartels, by the way, are armed and funded by the CIA in the first place, of course. And now we have Tehran slamming Washington for unilaterally closing Venezuela's airspace. This is going to get ugly, my friends, and all by design. This is the same old problem, reaction, solution, repeat for eternity that we've seen for so long. And I'm very critical of Maduro. I've been speaking out against Maduro for more than a decade. I got an official ban from the country at one point. It's not that I'm defending Maduro, it's that I'm defending humanity here against militarism, proxy wars, CIA operations, and more that we cannot dig ourselves deeper into. But before I get into this, my friends, I urge you to check those links below. Of course, we have lots of links that you can, of course, support us while supporting yourself as well. We have our link for Wave Watch 2.0, which you can order right now. It's sold out, but you could still pre-order a bunch more. Use code WAM, WAM, and you'll save more than $100 on this item. No Wi-Fi required. Endorsed by people like Dr. Brian Artis. 1,100 plus frequencies improves your sleep, balances your emotions, enhances mental clarity, and boosts your energy. Highly recommend people go and check this out today. It might be sold out, but you can still pre-order. So there's that. Of course, I urge people to also check links in the description for ways you can help support us. We truly appreciate it. Thank you to those who've donated on gogetfunding.com. Of course, we have a Patreon and a Subscribe Star, which helps us greatly. $4.99 a month or more pledged will get you exclusive content, including private video messages as answers to your questions, as well as early access to some videos. And of course, we have a Teespring store with merchandise and a Bitcoin address that you could scan here. And of course, you could help support us with Bitcoin as well in the description in text form. We appreciate it, my friends. Make sure to go and subscribe on Rumble and BitChute at World Alternative Media. Hit the like button, share on social media, and hit the notification bell if you have not yet already. Of course, subscribe. Let's get into this. So Zero Hedge reports Trump declares airspace above Venezuela to be closed in its entirety. President Trump said on Saturday on X that the airspace above the surrounding Venezuela will be closed in its entirety. This is totally insane. And I quote, to all airlines, pilots, drug dealers, and human traffickers, please consider the airspace above and surrounding Venezuela to be closed in its entirety. Thank you for your attention to this matter. President Donald J. Trump wrote on X. Now, again, why is it the U.S.'s job to close someone else's airspace? And before you say fentanyl and cartels and stuff, who armed and funded the cartels in the first place? Where does the fentanyl actually come from? China, by the way. How does it get into the U.S.? It seems to just show up in Juarez and go over the border. That's a CIA operation and a half. Why would drug dealers kill their own customers, the people that they depend on for money? It's all things that you should be wondering about. And fentanyl is very similar to it's kind of like an escalated version of the crack epidemic that, of course, was a CIA operation back in between the 70s and 90s. Of course, that involved the Nicaraguan government and someone that we interviewed personally, Freeway Rick Ross, back in 2020. We interviewed him February 2020. Of course, he was one of the biggest drug dealers who worked for this government dealing this crack strictly to black people in black neighborhoods to destroy the family, to create what would then lead to eventually the divide that led to the Rodney King riots, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, These are psyops, my friends. President Trump declares airspace over Venezuela completely closed. U.S. is weighing use of military force if President Maduro does not step down voluntarily. Now, again, Maduro is an absolute scumbag. He is the kind of guy who pushes insane socialist policies that lead to hyperinflation as he eats a burrito on television, laughing at the public, saying, no one is starving here when a lot of people are. I have countless friends from Venezuela that I talk to regularly. Remember, I live in Mexico. So I know a lot of Venezuelans who escaped the country to Mexico, and I talk to them regularly. Some of my best friends are Venezuelan. And, the things that I hear from them, and it's something that it echoes what I've been saying for a long time. Maduro's a horrible person. The war would be even worse. And by the way, this doesn't mean that he needs to be replaced by some U.S. proxy like Juan Guaido or all these others that they try to put in power in Venezuela. It's all a CIA op. Venezuela has more oil than any country on earth. It has one of the biggest lithium deposits on earth. Just think for a second what could possibly be a reason there, but it goes deeper than that, which I'll get into in a moment, because as I've said for a while, they want to create a Middle East in Latin America. And they want to fool you about it. Latin America is one of the most Christian parts of the world, by the way. You'd think conservatives would be supportive of that. Of course, family oriented, and people only focus on, oh, well, look at the rapists that come over the border. Yeah, but okay, most of those guys are basically imported to create the demoralization factor. Many have been let through for sure. And yes, there's a culture issue there as well. Same with from India, or same with from, Pakistan or other places, Syria, around the world. But you have to understand there's an agenda here. And these people that are coming over the border that you don't like, of course, shouldn't be wandering around the country getting away with murder, literally. But also, we have a major issue here with a vast majority actually having a lower crime rate than people born in the United States, which no one talks about, left or right, because it's not part of the narrative they want out there. They want it to be strictly mass migration or no immigration. And that is just an insane choice to choose from. Because yes, we need to preserve culture and everything, but we also have to understand that, some of the most conservative Christian, family oriented people coming into the country isn't the worst thing. The issue is that the U.S. is propping up groups and cartels around the world with guns and drugs to enforce this kind of stuff on the public, kill off the public, cause chaos, and then come in as a solution to bring in biometrics and technocratic agendas that basically force people out of the country while surveilling everyone that's in the country, creating a giant prison state. So that's why there's more people actually right now fleeing the United States and going into the United States. This is just a fact. And this idea that it's so black and white as to say, oh, it's either mass migration or no migration is absolutely insane. Though Trump doesn't necessarily say no migration. He wants millions of Indians in the country imported in to take jobs. So, okay, then. The consistency is not really there. Venezuela tonight, you have been warned, says U.S. Homeland Security News, and it shows Stingray fighter jets. This kind of rhetoric is exactly what we saw before the Iraq War. It's exactly what we saw before the Afghanistan War. And it's exactly something that seems to mimic what we saw leading into the Cuban Missile Crisis, which we'll get into in a moment. Maduro tells Venezuelan Air Force to be ready amid Trump threats. The South American leader has rallied troops after the U.S. president hinted at launching land-based operations. Now, there's already some fighting, to be clear, on islands, including there is a push to fight in Puerto Rico, which is absolutely insane. I don't know how that came up, but of course, it's all one big scripted show. But again, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And this idea that they'd have land-based operations, they've been bombing these boats, and these boats, they say, are full of drugs, and they haven't proved it, but nonetheless, Tren de Aragua was imported into the United States and was armed and funded by the CIA. And we're about to find out in a moment in this video how it's connected to Israel as well. Now, Maduro's throwing a sovereignty fit over Trump's airspace lockdown. Look at how Mario Nawfal phrases this. This is just terrible junk kind of alternative media. This is mainstream alternative media, as David Icke puts it. The rhetoric here sounds exactly like the opinionated rhetoric of the media, the mainstream media going into the Iraq War. He says, hours after Trump's Truth Social bomb, Caracas fired back with their usual screech. It's a weird way of phrasing it. And I quote, the Bolivarian Republic forcefully repudiates the insolent attempt to issue orders over Venezuelan airspace, a hostile act violating UN Charter Article 2 and 4. Translation, how dare the gringos play air traffic controller when our cartel buddies need clear skies for their joyrides? That is an insane amount of rhetoric coming from Mario Nawfal. What is he, pro-war now? I mean, the Bolivarian Republic, it's in the name. Bolivar. Bolivar was a general who very much, and this is very important to Venezuela, kicked the Spanish out after years of colonization and of course manipulation of their country under multiple dictatorships. Now, people can agree or disagree with the historical context all they want. The reality is, this is important to Venezuelans. They've always been very much anti, colonization from other countries, and their whole republic is named after a literal general who kicked the Spanish out. And it wasn't just in Venezuela, throughout the country. And of course, there is some irony to that, considering that the currency was called the Bolivar Fuerte, named after Bolivar, and fuerte means strong, and it wasn't strong at all. It was one of the worst currencies in all of history, with massive hyperinflation that impoverished millions of Venezuelans and destroyed the country. But that wasn't without help from the United States. And of course, we cannot look the other way on the fact that Maduro printed insane amounts of money. And so did Hugo Chavez, who put Maduro in charge in the first place and died before the negatives really started to add up in Venezuela. So now he's still seen as a hero, which drives me crazy. But anyway, the point is, it's all bad on all sides, and picking the black and white out of this is just absolutely fucking stupid. Excuse my language, but millions will die. And I just, at this point, I know some people want to be able to listen to my videos in their car with their kids around, and I apologize, but like at this point, like seriously, we're dealing with the potential of millions of deaths. This idea that Venezuela is shipping in all this fentanyl, it makes no sense. It makes no sense, just like it would make no sense for Lula in Brazil, or not Lula, sorry, I was just reading that on the screen. It makes no sense for Assad in Syria previously to have gassed his own people right as the U.S. said, we're no longer going after you. There's a lot more to this, though, and it does reach to the Middle East. And, interestingly, Maduro has been very, very anti-Israel, so much so that he said that the state should be destroyed. Now, this November 16th article from a couple of weeks ago says, could a small Venezuelan island be the real reason behind the U.S. military's Caribbean buildup? Now, there's a place called Margarita Island. I think it's important to look at this because as they're saying, okay, well, they're mobilizing additional military assets to Puerto Rico. The drug dealing or drug smuggling may not be the full story. No kidding. And by the way, saying that Maduro is human trafficking when the U.S. government is heavily involved in that. And by the way, killed millions of people in the last couple decades in wars. The virtue signaling, sick. Look at this. Jason Luris wrote this on X at a House hearing on March 20th, 2013. Lawmakers were briefed that Isla de Margarita Island, was being used by Hezbollah to train Venezuelan cartel members. Now, this is exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to the propaganda. It says Hezbollah has also conducted terror training in the Margarita Island for recruits from Venezuela and other Latin American countries. This, if you guys have been watching my videos, if you guys have seen what I've been saying for the last several years, I said when it comes to war, after Ukraine and Russia, after China, Taiwan, after India, Pakistan, after Israel, Palestine, and Iran, and all those, the next point of interest will be all Latin America, and that includes Mexico. That includes saying that, hey, Mexico is using IEDs given to them by Iran or Russia or China, which they've already claimed, and this is what's actually led to Pete Hegseth saying that, we have designated the cartels as terrorist organizations, which allows us to do airstrikes in Mexico. And he's been pushing the idea of doing airstrikes in Mexico a lot, including in the last week. And this comes as, as I've mentioned for years, Mexico and the city of Monterrey have had military parades with China and Russia for years, and it was always about framing it as a new Cuban Missile Crisis. But it's not just one country; they want to be able to have a land war right over their border because it causes as much chaos as possible, as much death as possible, as much retaliation and blowback as possible when they're right next door. That leads to, of course, not just the chaos we've seen in the Middle East, but that's on your border. That leads to them being able to bring in emergency orders and really focus on that destabilization worldwide, which they've been working on for so long. And again, when you see them blaming Mexico as saying, oh, the cartels are working with Iran, absolutely insane to say that. But of course, I believe that all these countries are in on it, including Iran. The people suffer the most at the end of the day. Governments are organized crime, and they all have their own manufactured agendas. But Israel is definitely in on this. Of course, they are majorly trying to take over the obvious gains from oil and lithium and all these other things and precious metals in Latin America. And of course, just expand their borders and expand their power structure, which they have lost a lot of over the years in Latin America due to multiple Latin American countries dramatically opposing Israel and not taking the bait with the blackmail that Israel usually gets on U.S. and U.K. and Canadian and Australian and New Zealand politicians, etc. So what we have is Maduro saying down with Israel. We see them say, oh, now they are working with Hezbollah in training on the Margarita Island, and that this will then affect the United States because they'll do terrorist attacks in the U.S. Just as they do these false flags in D.C., where the guy who shot this woman, see my recent video on this, by the way, the guy who shot these two National Guard soldiers, killing at least one. I don't know if the other has died yet. I think his name was Andrew Wolf, I believe, and the other woman was Sarah Beckstrom, I believe. Shot by a guy who worked for the CIA in one of the Zero units and was smuggled into the United States as part of a CIA deal and was a child soldier since the age of 14, all to bring in this rhetoric about Islam, which I totally get. A lot of people having their issues with Islam. I've lived in the Middle East, though, and the Wahhabism was created and propped up by the Israeli government in the first place through their propping up of Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Mujahideen, and then, of course, Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, and Hamas. And the list goes on. They're doing the same thing with the cartels. Not all of them, but many of them in Latin America. And this is all part of creating this domino effect in the Middle East and in Latin America to topple the current world order to shift into the new world order. And by the way, it's very much pro-cash in Latin America. It's very anti-technocracy, and that's suddenly changing as these threats continue. And they're pushing biometrics now suddenly for an ID by January of 2026 in Mexico. I mean, it's insane. And, this should be studied and not ignored because this is all part of the agenda. Again, the idea is to cause warfare on your border and near your border and throughout Latin America. And this would also destroy the oil trade. This would also destroy a lot of the supply chain for fruit and vegetables. This would cause absolute chaos. And this is part of the reason why they're shaking hands right now so much over beef and stuff like that with Argentina. But exactly what I've been warning about. Hezbollah has also conducted terror training on Margarita Island for recruits from Venezuela and other Latin American countries. Hezbollah operatives and their co-conspirators hold senior positions in the Venezuelan government. They provide travel documents, weapons, and logistics support to terrorist operations and cocaine smugglers, as our witnesses will explain further. And these witnesses are, of course, CIA, most of them anyway, from what I've seen. And again, it's just so convenient and so damn ridiculous. And by the way, Hezbollah, again, in Lebanon is under attack, and in Yemen is under attack by Israel, despite a ceasefire. Not that I'm supporting them. I think they're a CIA operation. However, it's pretty clear that they're just being used once again to mass murder civilians and take over land. And that's exactly what we are seeing in Venezuela. More proxy coups, and of course, Iran's playing along with it. Tehran slams Washington for unilaterally closing Venezuela's airspace. Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Iran calls a move a blatant violation of international aviation rules and an attack on Venezuelan sovereignty. Of course, he's not wrong, but again, this is exactly how they are framing it, my friends, and it's not true. However, it's a great story, a great pretext to bring this in. Danny Haifong writes on X after he shared Trump's post. He says Trump closes Venezuelan airspace over a fake drug war. He isn't president of Venezuela. Trump is pardoning former Honduran puppet Orlando Hernandez, who smuggled 400 tons of cocaine into the U.S. It's not about drugs. It's about regime change from Venezuela to Honduras. Exactly. Again, this is something that's happening right now. They are, as Max Blumenthal also talked about, he's freeing all these drug lords, these real ones, while claiming other people are drug lords so that he could bomb them. There's no consistency in this. As Max Blumenthal says, while waging a fake anti-drug war on Venezuela, Trump will pardon the convicted narco president Juan Orlando Hernandez, who trafficked 500 plus tons of drugs into the U.S., mainly because he figures in Washington's plot to manipulate Honduran elections. Raul Pineda, Honduran lawyer, an analyst who worked in his country's council to fight drug trafficking, explained to the Gray Zone that Hernandez's main achievement was to create a fourth estate of drug trafficking within the Republican model of governance. Now, I'm not entirely sure that wasn't a hoax in itself, but it's clear to me that with him being released, it's part of the CIA operation for drug trafficking for sure. And Trump seems to be completely involved in this. I mean, as was Obama. And, that's something I want to bring up here. For those that saying, oh, you're too hard on Trump. I was always calling out Bush. I was always calling out Obama. I always called out Trump. I always called out Biden. I always called out Trump again. Listen, it's called consistency. As Adam Media writes on X, and they're lying about Venezuela because it shows this meme where it shows they lied to us about Yugoslavia in 1999. They lied to us about Iraq 2003. They lied to us about Libya 2011. They lied to us about Syria 2018. And they're lying about Venezuela and Iran, by the way, and Syria again, by the way, and of course, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, you name it, Pakistan, India. It's all part of the stabilization for the global order, and all of the presidents are totally involved in it. Trump's drug boat attacks mirror controversial Obama-era tactics, says New York Times and Russia Today, where Obama decided we'll kill whoever we suspect of doing something that seems suspicious, regardless of whether we find anyone guilty, warrantlessly, of course, killing people. And of course, we know Obama was heavily involved in that because, as Hillary Clinton said, we saw he died, ha ha ha, in an evil cackle over people like Gaddafi. Of course, we saw the National Defense Authorization Act updated so that they could warrantlessly arrest anyone under suspicion of terrorism, and all you had to do was criticize the government or travel in a weird way. And now Trump is putting up a mass surveillance network on highways and roads with facial recognition throughout the United States to see if people's driving patterns are unusual in order to question them on terrorism charges. I mean, again, this is the peace president that's super libertarian and anti-establishment. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? This is the guy who is supposed to be, the peace president, and he's pushing back against the deep state. This is literally sucking off the deep state. This is the epitome of sucking off the deep state. This isn't Trump derangement syndrome, which was pushed by, CNN and MSNBC for years, Rachel Maddow, these people. This is a reality that we were always against. Most of us that I know that watch this show and criticize Obama and Biden and Bush for the same things. He's literally joining the establishment. He's joining the neocons. He's joining the Lindsey Graham ranks, and he's bowing to the Bush ranks now. And of course, I've always known this. I said this would happen in 2015 when he announced he was running, and I said he was going to win. And again, it was all about they had to create this image of anti-establishmentarianism in order to continue this on. Have a guy who has a bunch of crazy rhetoric, and people will believe him. And I quote, "We are everywhere. Fort Bragg Psychological Warfare Group posts chilling video. Yes, it's all about the PSYOPs, the secretive Fort Bragg operation that specializes in influencing people's thoughts, has released a hypnotic recruitment video that is laced with hidden meanings and strange images. Known as the 4th Psychological Operations Airborne, or 4th PSYOP, the group specializes in using the power of the mind to persuade opinion and discourse among the nation's enemies." Now, this is exactly what they're doing with you. You are the nation's enemies. You are the government's enemies. They hate you. If you are an individual in the United States, you are their enemy, whether you comply or don't comply. To those that think they could hide out by complying, you are just as much in danger at the end of the day. They hate humanity. This is a war against humanity, and they are manipulating minds. But I'll throw in a couple other Venezuelan related stories that I have up here. Venezuela rejects Trump's ridiculous terror designation of non-existent drug cartel. Venezuela says Trump has designated non-existent drug cartel as terrorist organization. U.S. covert ops believed imminent. It says airlines cancel flights to Venezuela after U.S. warnings of worsening security situations. I've been saving these articles for a while because it's pretty obvious what it was leading up to. U.S. military moving into Caribbean. Venezuela is about to learn what new phase means. Of course, he has this new operation. If I go back on my Rumble here and BitChute, Trump launches Operation Southern Spear. Southern Spear regards Mexico, Venezuela, Honduras, Colombia. Now, finally, U.S. considers plans to overthrow Venezuelan government. Reuters reports. All this stuff is coming out simultaneously. It's pretty clear what exactly is happening with this no-fly zone. We very likely could see militarism or some deal, and that deal will just lead to a cashless society and technocracy and emergency orders and food rations and control of different economies. I mean, come on. It's not going to end with nothing happening. All this stuff is for a reason, and it all leads from point A to point B. Whether there's a ground war, which is what they want, but nonetheless, they don't need, or it's just control over these countries out of fear in order to shift them into the Eastern Bloc of technocracy, which the West has been purposely committing suicide in favor of, in order to bring in the Trilateral Commission's dream of a global technocracy. Same thing that Elon Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, called for, a global government run by a party called the Technate Party, which Elon Musk says he's finishing the work that his grandfather started. And of course, Trump with the AI agendas, Digital ID, Genius Act, Real ID, the mandates of digital IDs in both the European Union and in the UK. And of course, the CBDCs being put forward, the digital euro. And of course, we're seeing that everywhere else. Look, the point is, it all leads to it's a piece of the same puzzle. It all leads to the same place, a global technocracy where humanity no longer remains as an independent vessel. It's simply a tool of a collectivist paradigm that everyone will be enslaved to. The basis of humanity being independence, individualism, freedom. It's synonymous with freedom, humanity. Those two things are the same. That is gone. And humanity no longer remains independent. It is dependent. Tyranny comes under the guise of convenience, and this is what they're going to do, but they need the right crisis, and they have these crises worldwide, and now they're bringing in the Israeli push for war in Latin America, claiming Hezbollah. I mean, my friends, the CIA operation, the CIA armed and funded group is in Latin America working with this other CIA armed and funded group. Remember that story from years ago where a CIA operative accidentally shot a FBI operative because both of them were undercover as terrorists and they accidentally killed each other? I mean, we're going to see a lot more stories like that. I'm just so frustrated by this because millions of people could die. Venezuela is one of the most beautiful countries on earth. It has been facing the horrors of collectivism and communism, and semi-communism, mostly hardcore socialism, which eventually leads to communism, for years. And the fascist dictates shifting into technocracy. where corporations and government are basically hand in hand. I mean, this is the difference. Fascism is government control over corporations. Communism is government is a corporation. Both are monopolization of, to an effect to control humanity. And all of them are part of this collectivist mantra, the greater good of the greater number, which always leads to less numbers because people will die and there will be more control over humanity where people will not have their own free will. This is evil. It's wrong. We need to push back. Anyway, my friends, with that said, there are ways to withdraw from the system. We don't vote our way out of this. We withdraw from the system. Don't keep all your money in the bank. Don't keep all your dependence on grocery stores for food. I urge people to check those links below. firstnationalbullion.com/schedule-consult/ There, it has to be that exact link. Again, don't shorten it. It has to be that. It's in the description. There you could avoid the CBDCs and digital IDs and the destruction of banks and the hyperinflation we're witnessing in a slow scale leading up to hyperinflation anyway. There you could buy physical gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, hold it in your hands, put it in a vault or put it in an IRA outside of the traditional IRA system and schedule an appointment for a free consultation with Mark Gonzalez, who's a good friend of ours, who we do many videos with over on Rumble and BitChute at World Alternative Media. Again, we have many of our economics videos with him. And again, you'll also get a complimentary investors package. Just let him know in the comments of the forum that you found him at World Alternative Media or WAM, WAM. Of course, you have to look at another currency, which is food. So you aren't dependent through a social credit score on their food rations later on down the road in this great reset technocracy. Go to heavensharvest.com for long-term storable foods that are non-GMO. There's organic kits, heirloom seeds, water filtration and storage, and books on how to get started, as well as freeze-dried foods. Use code WAM, W-A-M, and you will get 5% off as well as free shipping on your order. This is just an obvious thing to do, my friends. Stock up. If you've stocked up a little bit already, stock up more. We need to be prepared for this so that we are prepared to fight back. And our way of fighting back is not being dependent on them. They depend on the dependence of the masses. We need to reject that. Also, check out our link, as I mentioned earlier, for Wave Watch 2.0. It's sold out right now, but I say go and try and pre-order some more. There's inventory on the way. Call them if you need to. Again, no Wi-Fi required. Again, it's endorsed by people like Dr. Brian Ardis. It helps improve your sleep, balances your emotions, enhances mental clarity, and boosts your energy with 1,100 plus frequencies. I highly recommend people go and check that out today. And of course, you could go and check out vni.life/WAM, WAM, for Victory Nutrition International for a bunch of super supplements that are absolutely amazing, including Protovite. Again, use code WAM15, WAM15, and you'll get 15% off. And of course, you'll get 20% off instead if you just subscribe through our link. But nonetheless, Protovite has 100 plus vitamins. Of course, there's minerals and phytonutrients in this. Look at the before and after, the circulatory issues in the blood beforehand. The red blood cells have lost their negative charge, are not freely flowing. White blood cells are small. Look at what happens 5 minutes after taking it. This usually takes a month. Restored the negative charge. Red blood cells lucid, freely flowing, and white blood cells 4 times their size. I highly recommend people go and check this out today. The before and after speaks for itself. Anyway, as I close this off, we have gogetfunding.com, Patreon, and Subscribestar. Thank you so much to those who donate. We need your help now more than ever, my friends. As always, we are under attack for being consistent. Patreon and Subscribestar. If you do $4.99 a month in pledges or more, you'll get exclusive content. So thank you to those who pledge. And of course, we have a bunch of exciting stuff on the way for that. I've been sick lately due to lack of sleep, but I'm doing the best I can to keep pushing forward. I want to get you guys the truth, and it's very important in this day and age. So, of course, I'm a little bit tired, but I'm not going to stop. Of course, we have a PayPal address, ancientwonderstelevision@gmail.com. And of course, we have a Bitcoin address that you can scan on the screen here or check out in the description below the video. Of course, we have a Cointree link with a bunch of different cryptocurrencies that you could donate in if you please, including privacy coins. And of course, we have our Teespring store with a bunch of merchandise that if you purchase that, you help support us and get good messages out on the street. As always, my friends, You could find us on Telegram, Band.video, BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, and Brighteon at World Alternative Media. We're on Hive, Steemit, and Vigilante.tv at Josh Sigurdson. And we're on the bad guys, TikTok and Instagram, World Alternative Media, Twitter and Getter at World Alt Media, and all the major podcast platforms, except for Spotify, where, of course, we're banned. Hit that like button, share on social media, hit the notification bell, and hit subscribe if you have not yet already. And as always, my friends, live freely, live by example. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.